They say that crime doesn't pay, but I'd argue that it's paid for many before, such as the bankers who crashed the economy in 2008 but live lives of luxury today. Even a man like Jordan Belfort, who was arrested and imprisoned for securities fraud, but has managed to make millions today by writing a memoir book, giving speeches, and having a movie made about his experience. So saying that crime doesn't pay in itself is not accurate. It would be better to say that committing a crime while being stupid, well, that certainly doesn't pay at all. Today in this video, I'm going to tell you about 5 examples of the stupidest criminals that I've heard of. Fools that would make you feel like a PhD candidate. People that you'd be surprised could manage to tie their shoes or remember how to breathe. So sit back and enjoy our fine selection today. Daniel Rayens. You ever gone into a bank to open a new account and thought to yourself, you know what, I want to rob this place? No? Well, it seems like you've been missing out. For our first entry, we're going to talk about Daniel, a 35-year-old man from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. One day, Daniel decided to enter a Metro Bank branch in Harrisburg in March 2011 and told the bank teller that he wanted to open a new account. The teller was happy to comply and requested 2 forms of ID. Einstein here decided to comply and give her his real ID. But you see, all of this was just a ploy. Wanting to open an account and hand over his ID was just part of a 4D chess plan. Because after handing over his IDs, he decided to kick his true plan into action. Daniel informed the teller that he was there to rob their establishment and demanded money immediately. The teller complied, and Daniel decided to make a run for it and drove off. Of course, our sleuth didn't make it far because he was arrested on the same day by state troopers for suspicion of driving under the influence after he crashed his car. The troopers would run his name in the system and discovered that there was an arrest warrant out for him for robbing a bank. Remember how he gave his IDs to the teller? Well, that ended up being very useful for the police in identifying him. The troopers turned him over to the city police and returned the money. Look, I got a tip for would-be robbers. First, don't give your actual ID to the place you're robbing. And also, don't commit additional unnecessary crimes while you're robbing the bank. The least you can do is follow the traffic laws so that you can hide yourself from the police. Now you might be thinking, why would he give his ID? Well, apparently according to the police, Daniel forgot that he was robbing the bank and realized why he was there afterward. Don't you just hate it when that happens? Anyways, apparently our friend hasn't actually learned his lesson since, because I was able to find arrest records for him for both 2022 and 2023 for items such as trespassing, probation violations, failure to appear, cocaine possession, and drug equipment possession. For our next one, we have Phillips. In October of 2019, a man with his face covered went into a hotel lobby and robbed the front desk. Strange place to rob, as you wouldn't expect much cash to be there, and most people just pay online or with cards, but maybe he knew something that we didn't. The man pointed his gun at the clerk and demanded all the money. The clerk complied and put the money in the plastic bag. The man, understandingly, wanted to count the money, the way I like to count my McChicken nuggets in my McDonald's order, but he needed both hands for the job and placed his gun on the counter. The clerk decided that this was our John Wick moment and grabbed the gun quicker than the flash and pointed at the robber. The face-covered man was taken aback and requested his gun back, but unfortunately, the hotel's customer service denied his request. He fled outside but came back for another try.
You lose!
However, round 2 was a flawless victory for the clerk, and the man fled for good. A little while later, he was pulled over for a traffic stop while driving a gray Dodge Stratus for not wearing a seatbelt. During this stop, the police would identify the man. Turns out, he was wanted for multiple robberies, and the gun that he used in the robbery was also stolen. He was identified as Phillips, 26, of West Pawtucket, Kentucky. Once again, our assailant gets pinched during a traffic stop. I mean, come on guys. The least you can do is wear a seatbelt and follow traffic laws. Again, don't commit another crime when you're already committing one to begin with. Next, we have Albert Bailey. You know, sometimes it's a good idea to call ahead before you go to a store or an appointment to make sure that everything is in order and that whatever you need is ready to go. Well, apparently that applies to bank robberies as well. A mysterious man decided to call into the branch of the People's Bank in Fairfield, Connecticut, and let them know that he was coming to rob the place. He demanded the tellers should be ready and to place $100,000 in large bills in a bag so they could pick it up and leave quickly. If these demands were not met, there would be a bloodbath. The employee, realizing that this wasn't a regular customer, decided to call 911. The manager would decide to put the bank under lockdown, but not before one of the robbers managed to enter the bank. The robber passed a note to the teller outlining his intentions, but he would only manage to collect about $900. Unfortunately, due to the bank going into a lockdown, the robber couldn't get out and politely asked for the door to be opened. Could you imagine just pulling off a robbery and then being like, "Could you please get the door for me? Thanks." The robber also demanded that no dye pack be placed with the money. The bank, however, did not honor their request and included a dye pack that blew up when one of the robbers threw the bag on the ground. I swear, customer service is falling by the day. Of course, the police were waiting outside, and the 2 suspects were arrested that day. Turns out that the accomplices were Albert Barley, 27, of Bridgeport, Connecticut, and a minor whose name wasn't released. In the winter of 2005, 2 friends, Anthony Prince and Luke Carroll, 20 and 19 respectively, were living and working in Vail, Colorado at a sporting goods store. Originally from Australia, they had decided to move to the United States for a work holiday. Now Anthony and Luke had been working for some time and were starting to get tired of the usual routine. And being the young rascals they were, they decided to do something fun and different. Something to put a little kick into their mundane lives. One day, Anthony and Luke started to joke with one another about robbing a bank. It was quite hilarious, but eventually they thought to themselves, wait a second, we could do this. A complete bro moment. So jokes turned into plans and the duo decided that one day after work, they would pull off the heist. They decided to hit the West Star Bank, a local bank that both of them used for their personal banking. This was a great idea, as they would be quite familiar with its layout and employees. They marched into the bank still wearing the name tags from their jobs, yelled in their thick Australian accents, and demanded money. To make themselves more convincing, they had decided to arm themselves with BB guns. Pressing them against the skulls of the tellers and even throwing one of them to the ground, they managed to collect about $132,000. The duo would flee the bank and decide that laying low wasn't really in their interest. They would spend a lot of the cash in nearby businesses and purchase Rolex watches and airline tickets to Mexico. They even decided to tip their taxi driver $20,000. Eventually, the duo realized that remaining in the United States wasn't the best option, and therefore decided to head to Denver and take a flight back to Australia. However, before leaving, they decided to take pictures of themselves with the stolen goods and create more evidence against them. Before they could get into the plane, they were apprehended by authorities and taken into custody. Turns out, it wasn't that difficult for the FBI to identify them. Not only did they wear their name tags to the robbery and have thick Australian accents, but they also created a huge trail with their excessive spending. Remember how you're supposed to remain low after a major robbery? Well, Anthony and Luke decided that the advice was for losers.
We discussed laying low, but not everyone agreed with that. Be careful with this. We stole it.
Also, the bank that they robbed was their own, and therefore the employees at the bank were able to recognize them. Anthony and Luke would be sentenced to 4.5 and 5 years in prison respectively. Again, I think these might be the dumbest of the criminals that we've covered so far. On October 23, 2009, Matthew McNally and Joy Miller decided to break into one of the neighbors' houses in their hometown. Why this house in particular? Well, because one of the burglars believed that their ex-girlfriend was in a relationship with the homeowner. Anyways, the 2 gentlemen decided to have a few drinks before their robbery to steady their nerves. However, they may have drunk a little bit too much, as they had trouble even standing or planning the robbery properly. The duo realized that they had one big issue. They had nothing to cover their faces with. All great robberies usually require some sort of disguise to hide your identity. Of course, they were a little short on cash, so they decided to think outside the box. You see, they just needed to cover their faces, so why not just paint them? Unfortunately, all they had was permanent markers, and therefore that would do. Matthew and Joey covered their face the best they could with the marker, so they became unrecognizable. However, due to a combination of stupidity and drunkenness, their attempt to break in failed, and they fled the scene. Later on, a 911 call would be made, and the police would be on the lookout for the 2. You may have kind of noticed that a lot of these dumb criminals work in pairs. Anyways, the police would eventually pull over a vehicle matching their description and discover the sad and drunk heisters. What a sight it would have been. A sad and pitiful sight indeed. Both men were charged with attempted burglary, and McNally was charged additionally with operating a vehicle while intoxicated. The charges would eventually be dismissed, perhaps due to everyone just feeling sorry for them, but of course, their true punishment is being forever immortalized on the internet as some of the most ridiculous criminals in history. Well, I think we'll end it here. These are 5 examples of some of the dumbest criminals that I came across during my research. Remember, if you're having a hard time or perhaps you've done something silly recently, I doubt it was worse than what these men did. Heck, if you've done a robbery without wearing your name tag, you're already quite a few IQ points ahead. Remember guys, don't do the crime if you can't do the time. Or maybe just don't do it at all. If you enjoyed this video, I would love it if you could like, comment, and subscribe. Remember, if you do the crime, just don't be dumb. If you're smart, you can make an entire career out of it. Anyways, have a great day.